Guys, my name is Ankush Gaurav and I welcome you to Contour series. In the previous tutorial, I showed in detail how to use data binding feature which is provided by Spring MVC with this demo. Now let's talk about how we can customize data binding feature. Guys, before I start explaining everything about data binding customization, like what exactly it is all about and in what situations we would really need to go for it, let me give you a brief summary of what we learned so far. Up till now, I showed you when a user would submit this form on the browser, the request would reach to this request handler method. And here, this model attribute annotation would automatically bind all these form elements values with the corresponding properties of student object. And right after performing the data binding task, Spring MVC would send back the same admission form back to the client in case it finds any binding related errors present in the binding result reference. And if everything goes fine, that is, it doesn't find any binding related errors in this reference, then it will simply make a call to admission success.jsp file, which would prepare and send back a response web page to the client's browser displaying all user entered values in the admission form. Like this. Guys, this whole workflow and related concepts which I just explained to you in a very short manner, I explained in detail in the previous tutorials. Now the point which I want to make over here is, what if your Spring MVC project has a very specific requirement? Say here what I want is, I want Spring MVC to bind all these form elements values with the corresponding properties of student object except for the value of student mobile form element after I would submit this form. Now this is a very specific and special requirement in any Spring MVC project. The requirement is very clear. When I would submit this form, I would expect Spring MVC to bind all these form elements values except for student mobile form elements value with the corresponding properties of student object. So how would I do it? You can achieve such a requirement with the help of two concepts which are provided by Spring MVC: WebDataBinder concept and initBinder annotation. I'll do one thing. I'll make all required changes for such a requirement in the controller class, and later I will explain everything to you in detail. Alright, so here I'm done with making all required changes for the requirement which I just talked about. Here I've added a function which is having initBinder annotation on its top and WebDataBinder as its method argument. Spring MVC says whenever you want to customize data binding feature for a particular controller class, then you add a function in that controller class with any name of your choice. I've given here initBinder. You can give any name of your choice, but place initBinder annotation on top of that function and WebDataBinder as its method argument. Then whatever you want to customize, you simply go on doing that with the help of WebDataBinder reference. So the idea is very clear and simple. Whatever you want to customize for this controller class, you simply go on doing that with the help of this binder, that is reference of WebDataBinder. Here with this statement, I'm simply instructing Spring MVC to ignore student mobile while performing data binding task. Let's check it on the browser after this modification. Cool. So now Spring MVC performed data binding task for all form elements except for student mobile form element. Guys, I just showed a very basic example for data binding customization. Now let's look at one more advanced level example on the same concept, and consequently I would explain an important concept to you which is related to data binding, and that is the concept of property editors. Guys, here I would want you to observe a very important point for this admission form. For student date of birth field, I've provided date in this format. Now when I would submit this form, Spring MVC is going to bind the date value with date data type for student date of birth property, which is present in the student object. And the problem is, if you provide here date in some other format, then Spring MVC would fail to bind. Let me give an example. Say here I would want to allow user to provide date in this format, and if I provide here date in this format, let's see how Spring MVC responds. Oops, it just failed. It says it cannot understand this date format, and because of that reason's sake, it just failed binding student date of birth field value with the corresponding property of student object. So question is, how would I allow user to provide date in this customized date format? And the answer is with the help of property editors concept, which is provided by Spring MVC. I'll do one thing. I'll quickly make a change in the controller class for this requirement, and later I would explain everything to you in detail. Cool. So here I'm done with making all relevant changes for the requirement which I just talked about. I've added here these 2 lines of code for this requirement. Now let's understand what I've really done over here. Spring MVC says, hey developers, if you want user to provide date value for some form element in some customized date format, say in this format, then you got to register that specific format with the WebDataBinder reference, the way I've done over here. So here I'm first framing simple date format with the required date format which I want, and then I'm registering this date format with WebDataBinder reference with this line of code. Here with this line of code, I'm simply instructing Spring MVC, hey Spring MVC, whenever you would be performing data binding task for this controller class, and you would be doing that task for a field with the name student date of birth, which is having date data type, then you simply follow this date format for performing that data binding task. So this is the whole meaning of these 2 lines. So now after this change, if I would submit this form, let's see what happens. Cool. So this time Spring MVC did not complain for the format which user used to provide value for student date of birth form element. Guys, now let's talk about what exactly is this custom date editor which I've used here while registering this date format with WebDataBinder reference. Guys, Spring MVC internally uses a concept called property editors in order to perform data binding tasks. What exactly I mean by this is, Spring MVC has many built-in classes which it calls as property editor classes. CustomDateEditor is one of such classes. Other examples are file editor, class editor, custom number editor, etc. etc. Spring MVC uses property editor classes in order to perform type conversion while performing data binding. Spring MVC says, hey developers, I give you a list of property editor classes, like custom date editor, custom number editor, file editor, class editor, etc. etc. You can use a particular property editor class in order to customize data binding for a particular data type. For example, here we just looked at how to use custom date editor class in order to customize data binding for date type. Guys, in the next tutorial, I'll talk more on property editor concept along with showing you how you can write your own custom property editor class. Guys, a big thank you for liking all of my tutorials on Spring MVC. If you have any feedback or any comments, please provide them below the video or simply write to me on this email ID. Please hit the like button if you really like the video, and do not forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel Contour Series. and I'm gonna catch you in my next tutorial.